make the private sector the dominant player, allow private property to thrive. If you do all of those, you see your society is thriving. And so let's forget about the structure of an international economy, which never existed. That was the end of that effort to reform the system. What we had later as WTO, World Trade Treaty Organization, where a very distinguished daughter of Nigeria is the DG today, were all attempts to reform the system. And so the argument I'm making is that the basic orientation of the global order subsists up to today. In its basic orientation, it still remains an unjust arrangement, it's still inequitable, and it's still asymmetrical. And now that said, I'll go very quickly to talk a little about the Russia-Ukraine war, and then what we can derive, or what perspectives we can move out of that. And the first point I like to make in this regard, and this is critical for me, that what we're seeing is simply a clash between two concepts in international relations. It's a clash between the concept of sovereignty and the concept of national interest. That's simply what it is about. I recall that I'm talking about more about the geostrategic dimension. Sovereignty was defined several years ago by Jean Bodin, the French jurist, Jean Bodin, who calls it the supreme power of a sovereign over his people and territory, supreme power of a sovereign over his people and territory. But over the years, that concept has been watered down considerably. We talk of quantitative and qualitative reversals to the principle or the concept of sovereignty. The type of thing that Iraq tried to do to Kuwait in 1991 will amount to a quantitative reversal, because sovereignty was completely lost, because you just pick a small country as a big one, you just swallowed it. It's also possible to have qualitative, that is in degrees, in quantum. For instance, if you look at what the telephonic system has become to humanity today, you discover that when we talk of sovereignty, that a sovereign has supreme power, it doesn't make sense no more. It does not make sense, because there is no sovereign anywhere today in the world that will claim supreme authority. Nobody, no sovereign has that type of control anymore over his territory and populace. So the point is that the concept of sovereignty has gone down considerably. And so for those who argue that the sovereignty of Ukraine is the principal issue, and that sovereignty shouldn't have been violated, they are not alive to the fact that the principle of sovereignty itself has witnessed considerable reversal in the international system these past years. The other side of the coin is the concept of national interest, which is what drives our nations. Forget about this facade. People package their national interest in beautiful ways to make it good for you to want to take and swallow. I remember when we were young, if you wanted to take Nivaquine or quinine, there was a type that they coat with some sweetener, and you take it, you don't know how bitter that thing was. It's possible for nations to package their national interest and give the impression that it is global interest, it is collective interest, but ultimately it's narrow national interest. And so that is what drives the international system. Side by side with that is the concept of power, the ability to get people to obey you. They do what you want them to do, not because they like to do it anyway, but because they are compelled by the reality that they face to do such. And so when you see the national interest of a country at stake, and you see the country saying that we'll do anything to protect this. Indeed, that's what we call the core national interest that a nation is supposed to be ready to go to war to protect. And when you see now a global power, that is not just a global power, that is also a nuclear arsenal holder, talking about its national interest, talking about its security interest in existential terms, asking that certain things be done because the interests that we have, the interests are at stake. That's the type of thing Russia kept talking about. If those who manage the system had a better understanding of it, they would have listened to Russia and found a way to address those issues of concern. Unfortunately, the world didn't do that. And what we have on our laps is the Russia-Ukraine war. And so that's the conflict that you have. Ukraine's sovereignty versus the national interest of a global power with nuclear weapons. And that is what the world, including NATO, have not been able to manage well, that has gotten the world into this. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, just this year, indicated that Russia today holds the largest arsenal of nuclear bombs in the world, 6,255 warheads. United States, 5,550 warheads, followed by China and I think France in that order. And so when a nation that holds the largest arsenal of nuclear bombs says an issue is of critical existential interest to it, the realistic thing to do is to listen to that argument and find a way to resolve such amicably. The world did not do that. The world also did not, and I think this is where the US and NATO came in. They deny what I call legitimate equivalency in the way Russia complained about the Ukrainian situation. Equivalency in the sense that in 1962, a similar thing occurred when the old Soviet Union decided to place missiles on Cuba, the island of Cuba. And when it was discovered, it generated so much tension, global tension, because at a point, President JFK had actually activated the nuclear arsenal of his country. And ultimatums were given that if these missiles were not removed from Cuba, Cuba was practically going to be sunk. That was how bad it was. But again, the spirit of diplomacy took over and the world was allowed its peace. And now the argument I make is, if Cuba, that is 90 kilometers away from the United States, generated that level of tension, such that the United States government was already considering the possibility of a nuclear war to resolve that issue, why do we assume that Ukraine, that is contiguous to Russia, should not be treated in the same manner when Russia, like the US, began to claim that some of the activities of the government of Ukraine were at variance with its own interests, and they were indeed existential to its own interests. That denial of equivalency is one of the major reasons for this crisis that we're dealing with. In this war, there have been some trends, some developments that will suggest or give the impression that the global order that we know or we are used to is
Professor Mimiko.
The global supply chain, of course, has been disrupted, and we see the implications all over the world in terms of the price of gasoline, supply of wheat, and what implications it has for countries that depend on wheat and bread and all of that. The implications are still unfolding. There's also the possibility that in the place of the unipolarity that we have had since the collapse of the Soviet Union, since the practical dominance of the global system by the United States, that the possibilities are emerging that we could have other power centers, credible power centers, that will be credible challengers to the authority of the United States, countries like China, EU taken together, and now also Russia. These are some of the things that people talk about. The way the SWIFT payment system, the SWIFT financial transactional network, the way it has been handled, also has given occasion for other countries to begin to think about alternatives to the dollar in the global economic system. And of course, threats of sanction and the way sanctions are being weaponized. China has been threatened that it will regret if it chooses to go to support Russia in any way. People also argue that the slide of the US is sliding anyway over the global system. And so what are we talking about? We will see that we're moving into a new global order. But my argument is that there's no new global order in the offing. There's none. There's none, at least none for now. And the reasons why I make this very, very categorical statement are this. Number one, the global system as we know it is still going to be driven by power and national interest for a long time to come. For as long as the Treaty of Westphalia, the principle of Westphalia continues to rule the global system, it's still going to be about power. It's going to be about national interest. We shouldn't make any mistake about that. And so if something is not in the interest of everybody, there is the interest of a global power, you can be sure that you're either railroaded into accepting that, or you have to just accept it and pretend that it's okay for you. That's the reality. The second reason why, for me, I do not see a new global order emerging from this crisis is that there are limited chances of new states emerging now in the immediate future, in the immediate to midterm future, that will be strong enough to challenge and disrupt the entire system. It's not likely going to happen. You're not going to see a new country that has suddenly become so powerful that when it sneezes, the world will catch cold. It's not likely. Number three, the SWIFT system may have been weakened. As a matter of fact, people now talk about the misuse of the SWIFT system by the American government. That may be the case. As a matter of fact, we started talking about an alternative financial transactional system driven by the ruble and the renminbi. The process may continue, but we're not going to get anything that will fundamentally disrupt the place of the US dollar in the global economy, not in the short term, not in the medium term. And so even if SWIFT has been mismanaged, even if nations are not conscious of the need to do something about it, we're not likely going to have a completely different one happening now. And of course, I spoke about previous attempts to disrupt the system, which did not succeed through the Arab oil crisis. For me, the United States
Hello? Hello? Hello?
a winning team. The role Russia will play in this system will depend on how it goes about Ukraine. I had argued that if Russia's focus and intent was to just strike and demilitarize Ukraine, perhaps swallow up the Donbass region and continue to keep Crimea, it probably will be able to enhance its own power status. But if the purpose is to occupy Ukraine, a country of 43 million people, I can see that becoming a mess for Russia going forward. In conclusion, I argue that a global order exists, no question about that, but it is basically unjust. I also recognize that no order lasts forever. And so we cannot foreclose a new one completely. The current trends may actually suggest that the world is trying to find a new order. But I don't see that happening for the reasons I have given, not in the short term, not in the medium term. And I conclude by saying that even in the longer term, if a new world order is going to emerge, it's not going to be too different in orientation from what we have. It's simply going to be a continuation of the system of domination. Countries that are still very powerful will still continue to play the leadership, the dominant role. Countries that are not powerful, that are weak, will still continue to take what they must. So,
take over Africa. And in Nairobi last week, that actually the son of Margaret Thatcher wanted to take over an African country. Over Zimbabwe, that stopped it. Suppose Nigeria is very well managed. What is wrong for Nigeria to extend its boundary to Ghana? What is wrong for Nigeria to take over the Republic of Benin, bring back the Yoruba to join Southwest? And if the war reacts as they are reacting to Ukraine, should Nigeria now say, whatever you want taking over those small countries using the African countries. There are too many.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me just say something that is not controversial as I begin to address those questions, that we simply don't have the capacity to do what Prof has suggested. That's the truth. We don't have, we just listen to Sylvester, who made the point about power and all of that being absent. The moderator himself also alluded to the fact that even as war is going on in Ukraine, they still have electricity, water is still flowing, and we simply don't have the capacities to do that which has been suggested. I'd like to add, however, that we want the country to be appropriately managed. We have all the elements of power lying moribund. If we activate them very seriously, and we start by creating a very inclusive political system, we bring in everybody, we have a national vision of where we should be, we mobilize and create a society that is driven by meritocracy. We have the resourcefulness, the human capacity to be able to move the country in the direction that we all desire. And I say that if we were there, as a matter of fact, several of these countries, or some of them, will be willing to enter into some form of partnership, if not surrendering sovereignty completely, but some form of partnership that will make them to look every inch like Nigeria, in terms of the way the economies are run, in terms of the way the infrastructures are managed. We could have joint collaboration, joint management of facilities, infrastructure, and all of that. And in terms of foreign policy, we have them been on the same page with Nigeria. In the days of old, even when the economy was not predicated on some solid expectations, that we had a lot of dollars, we were watchful funds, Nigeria's voice was the voice on the continent of Africa. Across the world, Nigeria was consulted widely on issues pertaining to Africa. I refer particularly to the era of General Yakubu Gowon and under General Olusegun Obasanjo in relation to the decolonization agenda. And so, if this country were to be appropriately managed, given the size of the population, the potentials of our economy, and the size in relation to the other members of the West African sub-region, we wouldn't need to send special forces to Cotonou, to Ghana, or wherever. I recall in the 80s, it was Howard that said that.
Let me ask you, thank you. Let me ask you another difficult question. And it's for the purpose of this audience. Nuclear centers, building universities, building infrastructure. Some of his argument is said, look, Ukraine is the money from the Soviet Union, in addition to the Russians there. Would you imagine the ability that Nigeria is building a rail system to Niger? Would you imagine a possibility that Niger can now rally Fulani people to attack Nigeria after empowering them?
Is the fact that Ukraine has always been a very, very pivotal aspect of the old Soviet Union. It was the most privileged after Russia. Ukraine was the most privileged of the federated republics. And so all of those things, or many of those things that Ukraine will lay claim to today, you hardly will be able to divorce them from all Russia. And that was why when in 1994, the Belarus memorandum had to be signed, it was evident that the nuclear warheads in Ukraine didn't belong to Ukraine, as it were. They were all shipped away from Ukraine into Russia. I think the context is a bit different. When we build rail lines to the Niger Republic, the Minister for Transportation has not convinced anybody. Well, at least he hasn't convinced me from what I've read that he said about the basis, the economic basis of these facilities that we're extending to Niger Republic. I'm aware that the volume of trade, the volume of transaction going on around the Southeast, for instance, should ordinarily have advised us to build these very, very compelling rail infrastructure in that region and link as many of those cities to this as possible to the sea. But when you do that to Niger Republic, I'm not aware, and I'm talking very sincerely, the economic import of that. It will be like piping crude oil to refine in Kaduna, which well, has strategic objectives, but in terms of economic viability, many of those things never made sense to serious minded people. That's my response, Chair.